Human history is not a chaotic sprawl. It is a sevenfold ignition, a golden menorah lit against the cold backdrop of eternity. At the very dawn of time, the first lamp flickered into existence. The fire of conscience. Adam stood in the dust of a world that had just broken. The silence was absolute. He looked at his own hands, calloused by the new reality of toil, and felt the sharp, internal friction of the original fracture. He could have turned away into the shadows, but he stood firm. He drew a breath, steadying his chest against the crushing weight of what had been lost. In that moment of choice, he proved the truth. The divine image was not extinguished by the fall. It was merely refined. He walked forward into the unknown, carrying that small, persistent heat in his chest. Every step was a decision. Every pulse of his blood was a testament to a hope that refused to die. This was the first pillar of faith, a fragile flame held against the encroaching dark. It was not just a beginning, it was the foundation upon which all future history would be built, a spark that survived the wreckage to guide the path of all who followed. The cycle turned, and the world grew heavy with the rot of its own invention. Corruption seeped into the soil like stagnant water. Amidst this rising tide, the second lamp ignited, the fire of isolation. Noah stood alone. He did not look at the cities falling into ruin, nor did he listen to the laughter of those who watched him work. He focused on the grain of the wood, the thickness of the pitch, and the exact dimensions of the vessel that would hold the future. His hands moved with a rhythmic, grueling purpose. Day after day, he hammered against the encroaching silence of a world that had forgotten its origin. He was not merely building a structure. He was anchoring the blueprint of humanity within the narrow confines of the ark. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing against his shoulders as he hauled timber from the forests and sealed the seams against the coming deluge. He was the sole guardian of the light. When the sky finally darkened and the first heavy drops struck the earth, he did not falter. He stepped inside and closed the heavy door, sealing the life of the world within his own hands. The second lamp burned, steady and unyielding, a solitary beacon in a drowning age. The tide receded, and the third lamp flared, the fire of unknowns. Abraham stood at the edge of his ancestral lands, where the horizon turned into a blurred, featureless line. He did not look back at the life he had cultivated, nor the structures he had raised from the earth. He stepped into the void. This was not a journey of distance, but of total surrender. He walked until the familiar scent of his home was replaced by the dry, biting dust of the wilderness. The weight of his future, once held in his own grip, was now cast into the flame of a divine promise. He walked through nights where the stars offered no comfort, and days where the sun stripped the land of every shadow. Every step was a deliberate act of shedding the past. He was refining raw, restless faith into a covenant that would tether the destiny of all generations to come. When he reached the place of the offering, he did not hesitate. He placed his future upon the altar, watching as the heat of his commitment burned away the remnants of his own will. The flame was no longer flickering. It was a steady, blinding intensity that anchored his path to the bedrock of eternity. The third lamp burned, a testament to the sacrifice that gave history its direction. The covenant required a structure, and the fourth lamp ignited, the fire of warfare. Joshua stood as the central shaft of the menorah, the pivot point where promise met the unforgiving reality of the earth. He did not walk in circles. He marched with the weight of a nation at his back. The desert sand gave way to the uneven, rock-strewn terrain of the promised land. Joshua surveyed the horizon, where the stone ramparts of fortified cities rose like jagged teeth against the sky. He did not seek comfort. He sought the decisive strike. Faith was no longer a silent meditation. It was the rhythmic clatter of iron, the dust of 1,000 boots, and the raw noise of conquest. He issued commands that cut through the chaos of the front line. When the walls trembled under the force of the advance, he was at the breach, driving the momentum forward with relentless, calculated pressure. This was the fire that refined promise into possession. Every skirmish, every siege, and every hard-won yard of ground served to anchor the divine order into the very soil. The air burned with the heat of the conflict, and the ground shook beneath the weight of his resolve. Joshua turned the abstract covenant into a physical kingdom. burning with the steady, brutal light of victory. The fourth lamp stood firm, the warrior shaft of the history of the world. The rhythm of steel faded, replaced by the fifth lamp, the fire of the soul. David stood alone in the quiet, his hands trembling as he stared into the dark. The external battles were won, but the internal collapse had only just begun. Betrayal cut deeper than any blade, and his own failures burned like acid in his veins. He paced the stone floor, the sound of his own breath, the only witness to his undoing. He did not look for armor or weapons. He gripped the edges of his own brokenness. He sat, ink staining his fingers, as he forced the raw, chaotic agony of his heart into the structure of song. Every note was a confession, every line a struggle against the gravity of his own mistakes. He took the bitterness of his life and refined it, hammering the iron of his despair into the gold of the Psalms. He learned that worship was not found in triumph, but in the heat of the broken spirit. The air in the room grew thin, heavy with the weight of his honesty. He did not seek to hide from his past. He poured it into the flame. The fifth lamp roared to life, casting a light that did not illuminate the earth, but the depths of the human heart. The agony was no longer a burden, it had become a song. The song of the soul reached its limit, and the sixth lamp ignited, the fire of the cross. Jesus stood at the center of the intersection, where the horizontal beam of human history met the vertical reach of the divine. This was not a moment of quiet reflection. It was the collision of every human sin against an unyielding, absolute purity. The sky darkened, the wind stalled, and the earth groaned under the pressure of a million transgressions forced into a single point. He did not retreat. He absorbed the impact, his muscles straining against the wood, every nerve ending firing with the weight of the collective fracture. The air grew dense, charged with the static of a world being dismantled and rebuilt. As the final breath left him, the barrier between the human and the holy shattered. The corruption that had seeped into the marrow of the world for eons was burned away in the heat of the sacrifice. This was not merely death, it was a transmutation. The very nature of flesh was stripped of its decay, purified by the fire that consumed everything and left only the truth. The sixth lamp roared, turning the dark into a singular, piercing point of light that redefined the limits of human existence. The sixth flame burned white, and then the seventh arrived. Saint Michael the Archangel stepped into the breach, a descending force that shattered the remaining shadows. He did not fight, he commanded the end. With a single motion, he swept the horizon, and the last echoes of rebellion dissolved into ash. The seven lamps of history, once distinct and scattered across time, began to lean toward one another. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Joshua, David, and the cross, all pulses aligned. They surged together, fusing into a single, blinding pillar of brilliance that reached from the earth to the height of the stars. The friction of the world stopped. The grind of history ceased. Everything that had been broken in the long night was caught in this final, sevenfold ignition. Darkness, once a persistent force, was incinerated, leaving no trace. The roar of eternity fell away, replaced by a profound, absolute silence. It was the sound of a closing door, the stillness of the first Sabbath. The earth, refined by seven fires, settled into a perfect, undisturbed peace. The struggle had been sealed, the victory was absolute, and the light of the Creator filled the void, final and everlasting. History is not a random sequence of events. It is a cosmic forge, a 490-year furnace designed for one purpose: the purification of the seven spirits of God. This prophetic architecture moves with cold, mathematical precision. It is built upon seven seals and seven distinct 70-year epochs. Each period functions as a moed, a divine appointment where humanity is tested, refined, and stripped of all that is temporary. The scroll of time unrolls in seven stages, each led by a spirit tasked with conquering the friction between existence and decay. From the first year to the final count, the pressure inside this furnace climbs. There is no deviation from the sequence. There is no pause in the grinding of the gears. Every human life is caught in this rhythm, pulled toward a singular horizon where the friction finally ceases. The architecture demands total transformation, preparing a world of shadows for the unshakable brilliance of eternity. When the cycle completes, the scroll snaps shut. The old foundations dissolve, and the light that remains will be absolute. This is not merely the passage of time. It is the systematic burning away of the veil. The first 70 years belong to Adam. A white horse appears, bearing a crown of original dominion. The furnace glows white-hot as humanity stands at the threshold of perfection. Adam reaches for the light, yet the weight of the fall pulls the spirit back. The serpent's friction takes root, and the dominion fractures. The seal shifts. Years 71 to 140 reveal the red horse of the Noah epoch. The world decays. Corruption spreads through the soil and the blood of the nations until the earth groans under the pressure of its own malice. Noah stands alone against the tide. He marks the line of righteousness while the sky darkens and the foundations of the deep break open. The floodwaters rise, cold and absolute, scouring the world of its sins. This is the first great cleansing of the furnace. The land drowns, the old structures vanish into the silt, and the spirit of Noah guards the flickering flame of the future. The water recedes, leaving only the silence of a reset world, preparing the ground for the next testing fire. Years 141 to 210 mark the arrival of the Black Horse. Abraham steps into the famine-stricken wilderness. The scales in the rider's hand measure the weight of his resolve. Here, the furnace burns away the reliance on earthly resources. Abraham learns to look past the empty granaries of Egypt and anchor his trust in the unseen Creator. He wanders the dust, his spirit refined by the constant pressure of scarcity. Then, the cycle shifts. The pale horse emerges for the Joshua epoch. The time for wandering ends, the time for judgment begins. Joshua moves against the stone walls of the physical world. He does not negotiate with the strongholds of corruption. He executes the divine decree, blade in hand, dismantling the altars of the enemy to create a sanctuary for holiness. Every strike is a surgical removal of the remaining darkness. The earth trembles as territory is reclaimed, inch by inch, through the heat of battle. The wilderness gives way to the battlefield, and the furnace intensifies, forging a nation from the ashes of the old, broken strongholds. Years 281 to 350 define the David epoch. The battlefield falls silent, replaced by the altar of the martyrs. The spirit enters a new crucible, one of betrayal and relentless pursuit. David navigates the jagged terrain of a kingdom fractured by his own kin and the hunt of his enemies. He moves through the shadows of the palace, his life measured not by the conquest of land, but by the fire consuming his soul. Every betrayal acts as a hammer, driving the spirit deeper into the forge. He writes the Psalms in the dark, his voice a blade striking against the stone of injustice. He does not strike back with a sword, but with a cry that pierces the heavens. He waits. The throne remains distant, a promise held in the grip of a refining flame. He endures the isolation, the hollow chambers, and the constant threat of the assassin. His spirit is hammered into shape by the heat of longing. He stands at the center of the furnace, waiting for the final vindication of the crown, while the echoes of his struggle resonate through the halls of time, preparing the path for the ultimate sacrifice. The furnace enters its most volatile state as the timeline pushes past the 350th year. The refined spirit of the previous era cools, leaving behind a brittle, hardened reality that can no longer contain the pressure of the divine design. A low, persistent hum vibrates through the foundation of the world. The scroll of time, once smooth and predictable in its unfolding, begins to show jagged tears. The seams of the spiritual matrix are fraying. History is no longer a slow, steady burn. It becomes a frantic, pressurized cycle. Every action taken by humanity now carries the weight of a final decision. The air grows thick, ionized, and heavy with the smell of ozone. The stars overhead flicker with a rhythm that does not match the rotation of the Earth. Cracks appear in the sky, not of light, but of shadow, signaling that the structural integrity of the old order is failing. The silence between seconds stretches, creating a vacuum that pulls at the very fabric of existence. There is no turning back. The gears of the cosmic forge grind against each other, emitting sparks that threaten to consume the horizon. The world holds its breath, waiting for the inevitable snap of the scroll. Years 351 to 420 mark the ultimate crisis. The sun turns black, The sky loses its orientation as stars fall like fruit from a dying branch. This is the moment the scroll demands its final payment. The Lamb stands at the center of the furnace, drawing every drop of human tribulation into a single focused point. The air ignites. Pain, betrayal, and the accumulated weight of 5 centuries of failure converge upon the cross. The Lamb does not recoil. He absorbs the full, searing heat of the fire. The spiritual matrix, once rigid and unyielding, begins to buckle under the intensity of the sacrifice. Every link in the old chain snaps. The ground heaves as the foundation of the world loses its grip. Sound vanishes, replaced by a crushing pressure that flattens the horizon. Then, a final, structural fracture tears through the center of reality. The old architecture of history collapses. The veil is shredded. The fire that once burned the spirit now consumes the very mechanism of the struggle, leaving the old order in ruins beneath a darkened, starless sky. The sky sits empty. The chaos of the previous era drains away, leaving behind a silence so profound it feels heavy. In the heavens, motion stops. The gears of the cosmic forge grind to a halt. Michael steps forward, the only figure in the stillness. He holds the golden censer, its surface etched with the prayers of every age. With a single, deliberate motion, he tips the vessel. It does not spill ash, it spills judgment. The contents hit the earth with the force of a falling star. The air vibrates. Then, the final trumpet sounds. It is not a musical note, but a physical shockwave that strips the atmosphere of its density. The sound tears through the hidden corners of the world, flushing out the last pockets of shadow. Darkness, clinging to the edges of the ruined landscape, is caught in the blast. It is ripped from the soil, from the stone, and from the air itself. Every trace of the old rebellion is lifted and cast into the void. The world is being scoured. The eviction is total. Nothing remains but the raw, shaking surface of a reality finally stripped of its stains, waiting for the final snap of the scroll. The final year completes its rotation. 490 years of refining fire reach their apex. The scroll of history, weighted by centuries of human struggle, snaps shut with a sound that echoes across the void. The old heaven and earth begin to dissolve, shedding their form like dry leaves in a gale. The material world, once dense and difficult, loses its opacity. The veil between the creator and the created ignites, curling into ash as it burns away forever. There is no more sun to set, no more moon to wane, and no more temple to house the divine. The sevenfold menorah of the spirits ignites, flooding the expanse with an absolute, unshielded brilliance. The friction of the past is gone. The struggle of the epochs is resolved. Humanity stands within the architecture of the eternal. There is no shadow left to hide in, no distance to traverse. The light is total, constant, and permeating. It fills the space where history used to be, now a transparent kingdom without boundaries. The furnace is extinguished, the gold is purified, and the long journey of the 7 spirits finds its final, permanent rest in the radiance that never fades.